Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman Podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today, Alyssa and I are going to talk about love languages, and I have a sense it's going to go in a lot of different directions, but I wanted to introduce the conversation by giving the reference to the book. I didn't realize that it was a book that's been around for many decades at this point. So in 1992, Gary Chapman, PhD, wrote the book, The 5 Love Languages, The Secret to Love That Lasts. And in his book, he talks about the 5 love languages that he specifies are acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, and physical touch. Now, in all these years, I haven't actually gotten to know those 5 very well, and I've had a couple aha moments as Alyssa and I were preparing for this conversation. But what prompted this discussion, and for me to bring it up to Alyssa, was I was listening to a podcast, Hanging with Amy Poehler, and she was interviewing Michelle Obama. And during their conversation, Michelle Obama sort of shared that in her family, teasing is a love language. And because I didn't know what the love languages were, I went and I looked up the book and such. And teasing is not one of the 5 that Dr. Chapman specified, but that's a love language that I really understand because my family also uses teasing as a way to connect with each other, especially if we haven't seen each other in a long time and we're all trying to, warm up at a family holiday or something. The fastest way to get back to where we were before we left each other the last time was to talk about some old hazing that we might bring up. So anyway, I wanted to bring Alyssa into this conversation so that she's a lot more aware of the love languages. And so tell us about what your perspective on the love languages is before my distorted view comes into play.
Well, I think that, so I've always kind of known about the love languages, and I know mine and my husband. So mine's acts of service. And so, we talk a lot in my household about like filling each other's love tank. And my husband's is physical touch. And so I think, there's been a lot of discussions around that because we've kind of always been like, okay, I don't feel connected. Is this an aspect of that? So we've talked a lot about them in our household, and we have also, I was saying a little bit like my children. I don't know all 4 of their love languages. Only one of my children is very clear that her love language is also physical touch. And that comes into play a lot in our dynamics. So it's interesting because when Joji, when you first talked about said like your love language or your family's love language was teasing, I was like, oh, that's an interesting dynamic. But I think that so we're talking about like the love languages, but really what we're broadly talking about is like how ways that we connect with other people and like you were saying, like bridging that gap, whether there be like a time between times that you see people and things like that. I think that it's really about how do you connect with other people, how do you feel connected and feel loved, and I think that can look a lot of different ways. I think the premise is that people have these different ways of connecting, and some people need obviously like a more physical connection, while people need, like words of affirmation or quality time. And I think all 5 of them are great ways to connect with people, but people are, gravitate towards one, if you will, more than the other. So I'm looking at this more broadly. But I think it's interesting, like teasing. I think that can go either way. Like, I'm sure there's listeners who are saying, yeah, that makes sense. Like, my family's like that. I don't have a family that teases because I think everybody would be so offended and it would actually be really bad in my family dynamics. Because everybody's very strong-willed and opinionated and whatnot. and most teasing doesn't go over well. So I'm curious to hear kind of how that panned out in your family and what that looked like, because I think that it's a dynamic that families have that doesn't always translate for other people.
Right. And so I'm not exactly sure. I'm trying to think back to like when did teasing sort of become part of our family culture? And my dad was a pretty big kidder. Like he would, um, and I said I told you this before we came on the recording. Like my mom, unfortunately, was like the center of a lot of teasing, and my dad really initiated that, and that's the way he showed love. I think towards his mom, towards my mom, was because that's the way that um, he would just. He would talk about her in a loving way, and then then us, the kids, would sort of heap on some more on that. And there were time, and most of the time, my mom was a great sport about it. And every once in a while, she'd get a little prickly about it, and it's like she had had enough. And then looking at my whole family, like the holidays when we have multiple families together, it just gets really loud, and everybody's laughing and having a good time. And usually, there is like people that are the butt of those jokes or whatever. And it's all done in kindness. Like there's not anybody that leaves feeling badly about it because it's the culture of our family that we've sort of developed. Matter of fact, my brother's birthday was a week ago, and there was a picture that I put on the family chat of my or somebody else put a family. I don't know. We were sharing pictures of my brother and my little brother, and now he shaves his head because he's lost hair. And so I, in this family chat, now I just initiated this teasing where I said, yeah, kids, talking to like the little or the younger generation, like Uncle Joe used to have a full head of hair. You probably didn't know that. And I said, until the day that he got this perm in high school, dot, dot, dot. And I said, you should ask him about it like right now. And I put that in parentheses and I just let it, and I just dropped it like the microphone and left it just to see. But like, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, I just have so much laughter in me just thinking about it because I think it's funny because that's the way we communicate. And it's just a way to keep that laughter and that love sort of going, even though we all live far apart from each other. So anyway, it's sort of a weird tradition, but I was really quite relieved when I thought of like Michelle Obama's family and they do something similar. Now, in my marriage, my husband doesn't understand this characteristic of my family. He clearly thinks it's obnoxious and we get way too loud and we get way too disordered, and that there is well, a better, well mannered way of interacting with each other than being as obnoxious as we get. And so, anyway, there's that difference in our family because I think I identified after looking at the five love languages that my husband loves to give gifts and receive gifts, but I didn't know that that was a love language. And so the poor man has not gotten the best gifts from me or even cards because I don't really think of that as a love language. Like I didn't understand that's the way that he shows me love because he does very generously give me stuff. And because it's not my love language, I've always sort of thought it was like, I mean, it's a nice to have, but I'm like you, Alyssa. I think acts of service would be mine. So, like, the fact that he does laundry to me shows me that he loves us and our family so much more than like if he wants to buy me some flowers or things like that, which I now have this like realization like, man, we've just been like missing each other's signals. And yeah, we just crossed our 23rd year of marriage. Like it's so odd, like how did we last this long? I had a question mark. I don't know. But so how important do you think love languages are as you're settling into your marriage and understanding each other as far as you're concerned, Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, and I think that it's probably, you probably were going along. Like I was chuckling to myself as you said, like you and Dan, like missed the mark. But I'm guessing that you've probably communicated that in different ways. But it's kind of like you've said like, hey, this would to really help me out. Like if you do a load of laundry, like that would be really helpful. Like you're kind of like giving that message without the underlying like, hey, this is how to help me connect or help me to feel loved. So I think that it is really important. But I think that there's you kind of bring up the point that I have a lot with Jason, is that I I have to consciously make an effort and a choice to, like, hold his hand or put my arm around him or like do the things that I know make him feel loved and connected because it's not my love language. And so it's something that like it doesn't come naturally to me. Like I don't like to just snuggle up, like, sit close to him and things like that. But I have to consciously be like, oh, like this is how he connects, so I have to do this, even though it feels sometimes hard because that's not always, in that moment that might not be that's counterintuitive to what would like make me feel good. Like doing the dishes would make me feel better than snuggling together because, I always am kind of like I need to be doing stuff and that's maybe a separate conversation. But needless to say, I think that it's important to kind of see those signals, but I think that you also bring up the point about, um, you know, different families and different dynamics. It's hard to maneuver through them. I think you learn over time what, what your partner's family dynamics are. But I think that sometimes it can be like, oh, I don't, I think we've talked about before, like there's certain things that family members did in the past that I just was so taken aback by or so annoyed by. And then as I realized, like over time, I'm like, oh, that's like, that's their quirk. That's the thing that makes them who they are. It's not to annoy me, it's to, um, show love or something like that. And so I think that it's interesting to learn that about, your partner and their family. But I think that it's also, there's a lot of acceptance and sometimes doing things that are not intuitive when it comes to speaking somebody's love language or being able to connect with them when it doesn't mirror. And I don't know, I'd be curious to know if two people with the same love language, if they have an easier time. I have yet to find, because again, I've had this conversation with a lot of different couples. Like I have yet to meet to a couple that has the same love language. So I imagine that that's probably true for a lot of people. But again, I don't have the statistics to know that information, but I'm guessing that that's something that most people don't have the same one. And considering there's five of them, there's a lot of different combinations of such. But I think that that's, again, something that we have to work towards.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking, my mind went to exactly the same idea and the same question, which is that do we attract the same love language or do we find something else attractive? Because in most marriages, in the beginning, we're attracted to somebody who's different than us. But then as we get married and try to live happily, those differences do create some struggles because we really want somebody like ourselves, even though we sought out somebody that's different than us. And that's what keeps all marital therapists in business. So, I mean, helping people resolve that. But when it comes to love languages, I think it's interesting that you say that as you've talked about this with your friends and other couples, that you have not found somebody that has the same love language, because one would imagine that that would be something you would pick up right away. But you and I are both not in marriages that are in the same love language. So I guess I guess I wonder what it is that then um, sort of like what makes that person act a certain way if it's their love language. So I guess in my mind, I'm not being very articulate, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, say that when Dan and I were dating, if he gave me gifts and whatever, showered me with whatever, I'm not used to that. But in that courting period, that was really unique and different. And I got so much attention. So at that point, that was probably wonderful. And I loved it because that was something new for me. Um, so that was part of that courtship. But then I didn't realize that that was a love language because I wasn't really familiar with that term. And yet I didn't think about like, oh, well, that's the way he's treating me. That's the way he wants to be treated. And is that part of that's part of the concept of love languages that Dr. Chapman, I'm assuming, was talking about, is the fact that once you identify your love languages, then you as the partner know how to um, let your partner know that you love them because you're talking the language that is meaningful to that person. Am I correct?
Yeah. I mean that yeah, so that's the concept and that's the idea is that again, if if you go back to that concept of like their love tank. And so if you haven't if like words of affirmation for example is their love language and you're realizing, man, they seem to be disconnected or it seems that we're not, as loving towards each other, you might write them a note or you might say like, "Hey, you know what? I'm really grateful for everything you did today," or something like that. So you're kind of feeding into that so that that person feels that connection because that's, how they gain a sense of love in the relationship. And so it's interesting. I think that there's probably multiple pieces to it. So I think sometimes I want to say like sometimes Jason will like do a load of laundry and be like, do you feel, connected to me?" And I'm like, "Not really." Like, I appreciate that. That's great. Thank you. But I mean, it's not just like one gesture always translates to feeling more connected. I definitely like appreciate what he does. But it's kind of like that mentality of me not having to say, "Hey, I need X, Y, and Z," and instead him kind of taking the initiative. Like when he takes initiative, that to me is such a more substantial gesture. And it's not like he did 20 things. It's just like the sense of he knew, to do this. Intuitively, he knew to do it because he knows that that's my love language, if that makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, no, it does. It does. And I was just doing a little bit of Google searching as you were talking, and it says clearly that couples don't need to share the same love language for a successful relationship, but it is more important that both partners are aware of and actively speaking each other's languages. And so, obviously, having overlap does make things easier. But really, the work involved is understanding your partner's needs and making an effort to show love in a way that resonates with them. And especially if it doesn't come as naturally to you because it's not your natural love language. So, I mean, I guess that is everything that we just sort of said. And that it really is a learned skill if you have different love languages and that you have to make intentional effort because otherwise you're not going to communicate effectively. And that it is the key to intimacy is the way to communicate in love languages that are received well by your partner. So, I mean, and then when you took it, Alyssa, to your children, I didn't even think about that. To be able to show your children that you love them in a unique way, because that it's like a lock and key kind of a thing, right? I mean, if your children have all varying different types of love languages as a parent, you have to be able to connect with each one of them in a different way. Boy, does that, I'm just exhausted thinking about you having four kids and having to find four different keys. I mean, I'm a little tired just thinking about that because it's a lot of work. I mean, three of them are still a mystery to you, and yet you have to be adaptable for all the different ways your individual children want you to express your love to them.
Right. Yeah. Like, yeah, it is exhausting because I think that it was very easy to see the one child whose physical touch is like I think physical touch is the easiest one to identify because she's always like, "Can you hold me? Can you hold my hand? Can you be next to me? Can you sit next to me?" Like it's literally like it's very clear that that's how she connects. But the other three don't speak it so clearly in a way that I can wrap my head around, and maybe because my husband is the same love language, like, I clearly see it, but I really, like, as we're talking, I'm like, I really don't know what the other 3 are, or what their love languages are because it's not as clear. I see, like, a lot more of a little bit of everything, like, I know one child really loves giving gifts, but receiving them doesn't seem to be, like a way to connect. I think quality time is probably universal. They all are constantly requesting like time with me individually. So maybe that's possibly one or two. But again, it's I think the other ones are not as clear to me in the moment where I'm like, oh yeah, I can see what this child needs to feel connected with me. I think that I just kind of go through like, you know, making time for each of them, doing things with them. And I'm sure if I sat down, or even if I think there's a quiz that goes along with it. So if I had each of them take the quiz and see where they come out, maybe that would be helpful because again, we're kind of doing this not by the book, if you will, just kind of my observations, but maybe that would help me to connect a little bit better because a lot of times I find myself floundering of I don't know what they need and I'm just hopeful that I can figure it out in some way, shape, or form.
Now, as I was thinking about it, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the four tendencies. And I think there's some similarities between these two concepts. I'm not saying that they're, exactly the same, but I think they both sort of shed some light on each other. I can't remember enough about the four tendencies to be able to speak about it as well as you might be, Alyssa. But do you see that there might be some similarities between those two concepts?
Well, I think I was a little bit more diligent in that, like, I literally had everyone in our household take the quiz, so that, like, I knew what their, tendency was just because I had it, like, down on paper, and again, like, ones jumped out at me, like, the questioner, that was my son, was very clear to me. I was like, "Oh, when they gave the examples, I was like, "Yeah, that's him. He's constantly questioning things. He, questions like, "Why do we do this? Why does this happen?" Like, that was very, very clear to me that tendency fit him. But the other ones, again, weren't as clear. So sometimes I think certain characteristics or certain categories fit, and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, total sense. But I don't think, I mean, I think, we're talking about people are dynamic, they're all always changing and things like that. So I think that we have tendencies or love languages, but I think that there's probably some gray too, because sometimes people don't clearly fit into one category or the other, and you kind of just, you know I mean, I suppose you could just put them in a category for the sake of the conversation, but I don't see it as clearly defined for all of my children, let alone, the people around me.
Yeah, I guess you could experiment, um, and like pick one of your children and go through like the five different love languages and see which one they react to the best, right? Like if an act of service really was something that they responded to, or whether what you said quality time, all of them would take. But like gift giving or receiving a gift, and if that was more um, impactful than maybe an act of service that you might have done, for one of them. I guess that might be another way to approach it. I mean, I think your littlest one is probably too little yet. Your older two, I think, give a little bit more experimentation. I think you could try to see if there's one way to get a better reaction than the other. But like you were talking as we got on, like as kids get older and they go through different developmental ages and they start to exert their personalities, exert their will. Everything is sort of a roller coaster. I think after the age of like 9, everything goes up and down because so many things are shaping them and they're trying out different things and uh, about their new words or new actions or new privileges. And, everything is up for grabs, I think, at any given time uh, based on their age. So it might be more challenging than I originally thought, but it definitely is going to be lively, no doubt about it.
That's true.
And just when you think you have it figured out, they may change, and that'll be starting back at square one, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I appreciate that because I think, that is part of, I think, any relationship that we're experimenting and trying to figure out what makes this person feel seen and heard and valued and loved. And it's always an ongoing process to kind of figure that out, to figure out what connects them to us, what we can do to try to make that happen. And I think that it's not always clear. by any means, but it's worth kind of looking into to try to connect with them. If the relationship is worth connecting, or that's something that you want to do, I think it's about, exploring that, like you said, experimenting and kind of seeing where it takes you.
And I was just thinking about it that even though I didn't know that acts of service probably my love language. Now that I think back to the conversations I had with my husband about him taking over dinner because he was retiring, and that was something that, in my opinion, he should take over because it didn't make any sense to me that I would be working and then come home and make dinner on top of that. But I think that that's a really good example of why that was so important to me, because it is an act of service, right? Like, now I would have dinner waiting for me when I got home, not because I expect him to serve me, but because that would be one thing taken off my plate. And that's really an important thing that I worried about all day long, and had to think about, either at the beginning of the week as to what the meals were going to be for the week, or do I have to pull something out of the freezer because now I've got to prepare that tomorrow for dinner. And so now it's like I'm having all these like moments of like, oh, now that makes sense. Like why I pushed for that so hard. And why in the beginning, when my husband didn't get it, I was like, why is this so hard to understand? Like it makes perfect sense. But it's because we were talking it aunt in our love languages. And so now I have to sit back and think about all the other things. And maybe like as I realize something is important, like how do I position this? And I have a question, Lil. So when you and your husband talk about love languages, or like if you're talking about something that involves love languages, do you use that language explicitly so that sort of sets the frame for the conversation? Or do you not say the words, but you both know what you guys are talking about?
No, I mean, we use the word. So and like I said, we use the phrase like, my love tank is empty. Like I feel disconnected. I mean, I think we pretty much stay to that. Probably, I don't even know. I think somebody gave us the book like when we got married. Like, I want to say like that's how this came about, that like, I was like, oh yeah. And I'm pretty sure I probably read it. So that was like 13 or 14 years ago. So I probably read it then, and then it kind of just stuck because I was like, "Oh, we know what each other's love languages are." Um, it's funny because I mean, I still need reminders of like, "Hey, this is a way to connect with your husband," and that sort of thing. But we stick pretty close to the actual words, and say again, like, "I need you to do this because this will fill my love tank," or this is an act of service, or I want to sit with you because I want to be physically close, and that sort of thing. So we stick pretty closely to the words.
Yeah, and I would say there's a little bit of a burden if you've known that from the get-go because, I mean, I think it's a lovely idea for a wedding gift. I think it's really, very thoughtful in certain ways, but you and I are both in the world of therapy and psychology, so we would think that. But I also feel like, man, if I knew from courtship what my husband's love language was, that like puts a responsibility on me to like be aligned with that and to be aware of that at all times, right? Um, Right now, I feel like I have a little bit of a break because it just all dawned on me in the last 24, 48 hours. But I feel like, man, if I'd known this for 23 years, I should have been a much better partner than I've been. But anyway, I guess you can always learn and continue to adapt because hopefully Dan and I will have another 25 years together. So, I mean, I just think it's sort of, it all started because I listened to this podcast and I heard about teasing and I'm like, oh, this explains like everything to Dan, I hope, because my family is so much like this, and he so doesn't understand my family. And yet it really became more about our marriage and how we could communicate. So I think that's like a full circle moment. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's, again, we're always learning, we're always kind of creating new ways of connecting with other people, and figuring it all out. But it's hard. I agree with you. The point, to your last point of the burden of knowing, and trying to fulfill that, because like I said, to me it's sometimes counterintuitive. I don't want to, but I know that I should, because that is how I connect. And so that is, and a lot of times, it's work. It's more work than I would like to say it should be, but That I think that everybody would probably agree that a relationship is, you put time and effort and a lot of work into it to make it what it is. So that's yeah.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say is that I do feel like now that I have this information, I feel like now I have like the inside scoop on how to proceed. Like if there are difficult or sticky situations, at least now I have a little bit of an idea of how I might approach it. And so I sort of feel like I got the answers to the test a little bit. So I'm excited to see how that unfolds now with different situations that will come up in the future. So I'm a little excited to practice this and see how it goes. But because I feel like I've been flying blind for a while, and so now that I have this information, I feel like a new sense of like hope, like oh, at least now I have a way to proceed when things might get difficult. Whereas before I didn't have that insight, and you're sort of trying whatever and grappling and maybe trying things from the past that didn't work. And so, I'm a little bit hopeful today. I think it's a good thing.
Oh, well, I love that for you. And I will kind of round us out. I think that, we always love having these types of conversations. And for those of you listening in, let us know how has love languages played out in your lives? How have you connected? Or maybe you're hearing about this for the first time as well. I was thinking, Joji, maybe we'll do like in 6 months from now, we'll do a recap and see if things have changed for you in that time. But as always, we thank you for listening. We hope to hear from you and the various ways that you can connect with us. And hopefully, this has been a conversation that opens up other ones for you and those around you that you want to connect with. So, thank you for listening, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.